Start now. So thank you everybody for agreeing to join this meeting. This is our first VI forum for York, and our subject this meeting is going to be public transport and taxis. Before I hand over to Simon, who'll be chairing the meeting this evening, could I just go through a couple of house rules, although you're all in your own homes, but it's just the general well-being. So if you need to have some water, please make sure you've got some water next to you. You won't be on camera, so if you need to have a stretch, feel free to have a stretch at any moment, at any point in time. And the final point is, if you feel that your computer or whichever device you're using is getting too hot, please don't persist with it. If you need to switch it off, then please do that so you don't cause any injury that way at all. As I said, we've got 5 speakers this evening, and I'm going to hand over to Simon, who is one of our Sight Loss Council volunteers, to chair tonight's meeting. So over to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Good evening, everybody. This is the York Sight Loss Council VI webinar for transport and taxis. It's our first one, so thank you very much for attending. We've got a number of speakers who come from a range of organisations that provide accessibility to transport to blind and partially sighted people in York and the surrounding areas. We'll go through the speakers one by one, and then after all the speakers have done their section, we'll go through to the Q&A section. People have sent in some pre-registered questions, and during this session, if you've got any questions that you'd like any of the speakers to answer during the Q&A session, feel free to use the chat function. So our first guest speaker tonight is Councillor Andy de Gorn, who is the Executive Member for York Council for Transport, who will go through the strategic plan for transport and go through how the views of people has changed since the COVID to use the public transport. So over to you, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, and hope everybody can hear me clearly. I'm the Executive Member for Transport for City of York Council. It's a position that I've been in since May 2019, so obviously pre-COVID, I took on this role, and as has been said, my responsibility is very much about looking at the strategic overview of transport in the city. So that is effectively all forms of transport, and in that I would include walking, cycling, taxis, buses, trains, whatever form of transport people need to use. It's coordinating the plans and the arrangements within the city for that. Now, I suppose it does go without saying that City of York Council has a responsibility. We maintain the highways. Highway includes footpaths, bridges, anywhere that people have public access to. It's our responsibility to look after that as long as it's an adopted highway. But on those roads, then there are obviously private individuals who will use them, but also bus operators, public transport, taxis, whatever form of transport are making use of those facilities. And we work quite closely with the bus operators, as you'll sort of hear later on. The privately run bus operators, some of which are run entirely on a commercial basis, some of them might be contracted with the council. So for example, the Park and Ride service, which is one of the best in the country, the first to be going all electric, one of the best sort of examples of that type of approach in the country. So we have, as a city, over the years, I obviously can't take credit, I've only been in this post fairly recently, but over the years we have built up a very good service in terms of public transport in the city, and provision for sustainable travel in particular. So that the overall policy, which might come up in conversations, the overall policy direction, from time to time in the past there was something called local transport plan. The last one of those was formally adopted about 10 years, well actually just 10 years ago this year. And this coming year we are looking to refresh that, to actually review what's in there. Obviously there's quite a lot of big changes since that was adopted, things like the community stadium at Monk's Cross, the shopping developments, and then more recently of course the impact of COVID on the way that people choose to get around. So my responsibility is, as executive member, is the broad approach that we take to transport in terms of maintaining highways, developing changes within the city, all those sorts of things, and having that longer term view, which hopefully that we've already started a consultation. You may or may not have noticed that there was something called Our Big Conversation, which went out with the Our City publication and was also available online. The first stage of that, the results of that were quite encouraging in terms of people's views about how we can make our transport responsive to the needs that we have for climate change and working towards zero carbon in the city by 2030. So that was the first stage of that consultation. There is another stage coming up shortly this autumn, leading into a draft policy document for the city. I probably should focus a little bit on COVID as well. Obviously, when the pandemic struck, we had instructions from government that we were not allowed to drive except for essential journeys and so on. A lot of people across the country who were forced to work from home did find that they felt their local environment was perhaps a little bit more important than they considered previously. The fact that they have opportunity to walk or cycle, to get out in the fresh air, by whatever means, became more significant. And then since the end of the first lockdown, we were given instructions as local authorities to try and facilitate outdoor living by whatever means. So support the businesses that were, particularly in York, a place like York, were concentrated in very small premises where there's very little chance of social distancing indoors, as far as possible to encourage them to make arrangements so that people could, particularly obviously more so in the summer, that they could be outdoors and keep safe from COVID in that way. So there were some changes that were made within the city centre very quickly to allow for that to happen, make it easier for people to safely walk about, for them to be pavement cafes and so on.
I don't know if that's just me or if we've lost Andy. Andy, we lost you for about 30 seconds there, but just to let you know, you've got 1 minute remaining.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm just about coming to the end of what I was going to say, but yes, there's sort of changes that are taking place within society. As a council, we have to try and respond to those, support local businesses, but also ensure that people with whatever disability it is have got a safe and attractive means of getting about as far as possible. So there are some difficult choices that as a council, some of you, the people listening, will be aware that we are making, but we are trying our best to do that very closely in consultation with the people who are most directly affected, and make the right choices for the long-term benefits of those individuals and for the city.
Okay, thanks for that.
Is that sort of good enough for starters?
Yeah, I mean, you covered a wide variety of topics, and obviously, you know, you guys have been doing an exceptional job in strange circumstances. So thank you for all that. I'm sure there's some questions that people will be asking you during the Q&A session after all the speakers are finished. So our next speaker is Brandon Jones, who is Operations Manager for First Bus York. And he's going to outline the future plans for the buses, such as the audio description on the buses and the Meet the Bus Day in September. So over to you, Brandon.
Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everybody. Just following on some of the points that Councillor de Gorn raised there, and a reflection really on how much of our public transport network is about working together collaboratively. So thank you for the invitation today, because partners, both obviously at City of York, other operators, and our customers, actually, you know, lots of feedback, and it is welcome to be able to help keeping improved services. So yes, partnership and working together, as Councillor de Gorn said there, really important to be able to continue making progress. So first, York, a little about us. We're part of Transport Operator First Group. The business is very much focusing on bus and rail in the UK, having until recently had some significant American interest, which has been sold. Here in York, we have one depot, about 100 vehicles, roughly about 300 people. And as I say, we're one operator, and I think in recent years particularly, it's very much evident that operators are working together now, and in York, one of the ways that we do that is through the Quality Bus Partnership. So yes, a collaborative and I believe successful bus operation, regularly achieving you know, some of the top marks in the customer satisfaction surveys, and of course, as also Councillor de Gorn said there, significant investment, things like electric vehicles. So as a commitment to customers and obviously improving accessibility, there's also a significant commitment to improving the environment that we operate in as well. So yeah, lots of things going on in the public transport sector. Clearly, the last 18 months or so have been extremely testing for a lot of organisations, and particularly for our customers and our staff. Our focus has been very much on safety, but also during that period we have used the opportunity, if you like, to improve some of the things that we do and also react to customers. So our app, our First Bus app, has been developed, for example, to be able to show capacity, which is important, particularly when we had reduced capacity on buses due to social distancing. We've worked very closely with the council, adapting services. Services have had to change and react. Obviously, in our case, very grateful for the support, both local and national government, to be able to keep services running, particularly for key workers. But also we've done some work actually with visually impaired groups. For example, in the past, some visually impaired customers who've used a card to access the vehicles, they've been naturally, as our drivers have been less comfortable about handling cards and each other's property. So we've been able to accept tickets by drivers manually accepting them rather than having to adapt them onto the ticket machine, which has meant less handling, which has been, I think, something that customers and drivers have welcomed. And in some cases in the region, we've welcomed puppy training into the depots, because clearly that's not as been easy to do over recent months. So things have carried on, and we've worked very closely with partners, but safety's been the focus. Just looking ahead a little bit, and what we're very keen to do, Driver training, lots of investment has been going into that in recent years and will continue, particularly around non-visible disabilities, giving customers more, giving our drivers a better opportunity to understand that customers have different needs and looking at individual requirements. I mentioned about investment. We've adapted vehicles to try and help improve accessibility. And we have done, and we are looking to do, as Ian mentioned there, more activities with customer groups. And we have an event coming up in September that we're looking forward to working with organisations to. It's a two-way communication. So give our drivers a better understanding about what it's like for our customers using buses who are visually impaired, but also for our customers also to understand the kind of things that drivers go through as well. So very much a two-way conversation, and we're hoping that will be the start of several activities. The other thing I wanted to mention around investment, and just picking up this point about audio visual, we may well go into this a bit more in the Q&A. There's been significant investment in audio visual on the park and ride services. Clearly, there's a standard of provision that we're wanting to target on that service, and in fact, not just in York but across the region where we've invested in new buses, we've made a commitment as an operator to make sure those new vehicles are fitted with audio visual. So over the last few years, whenever a new vehicle's gone into service in the region, it has been fitted with audio visual next stop. And we've worked with lots of organisations quite close to us in Leeds, for example, where we trialled the service with customers with visual impairment and other partners to get their feedback before we actually put the vehicles into service with the audio visual on, and we learned lots of things from that process. We've very recently had some government guidance that audio visual next stop equipment will actually be a requirement on public transport services, and we're very much looking forward to working with local and national government to implement that. The details are yet to be provided in terms of what that actually means, but we do see a lot of opportunity with something called the Bus Service Improvement Plan that's part of a recent strategy called the National Bus Strategy, to target investment into the city and into public transport, and continue to improve, on the progress that we've been making. So I think that more or less wraps up, Simon, on kind of where we are in terms of a background, and as I'm sure there'll be lots of questions in the Q&A.
Okay, that's brilliant. I'm really looking forward to the Meet the Bus Day, and it'll be really interesting to see the improvements that the government guidelines will bring. So thanks for that. Our next speaker is Charlie Woodhead from LNER. He is the Accessibility and Inclusion Manager, and talking about the passenger assistant app and safer trains. So over to Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Just checking you can hear me first.
Yeah, that's open now.
Excellent, that's a good start. So good evening, everyone. So as Simon said, my name's Charlie Woodhead, and I'm the Accessibility and Inclusion Manager for LNER, or London North Eastern Railway. So we are the train operator that operate trains between London King's Cross in the south, through places like Doncaster up to Leeds, and then through York, onto Newcastle, Edinburgh, and beyond to places like Inverness and Aberdeen. So we operate about 930 miles of route. So quite a long way to go on our trains, but some lovely exotic destinations. And within that, we manage 11 stations up the East Coast, including York Station. And I sit as a part of our customer experience team, and I manage accessibility for all of our customers across everything, any way that we could interact with you. So our trains, our stations, our website, our contact center, the passenger assist service, all that kind of interaction that we'd have. And I manage both the legal compliance side, but that's a bit boring, really. That's the really bare minimum that we just should be doing anyway. But then also the customer experience. How do we give you a journey that you actually enjoy and that make you comfortable, happy, and that you want to come back and travel with us again in the future? So that's what I do in a nutshell. So some of the kind of things I wanted to kind of give you a brief update on. So obviously, as everyone has said and will say, it's been an interesting 18 months. Not something that we were particularly prepared for, but it's been a challenge. But we're really pleased with how, as an industry, we've tackled the pandemic. So when that all kicked off in March last year, which feels like a decade ago, we made sure that the first thing we did was find a safe way to continue to deliver our passenger assistance service. And we managed to continue seamlessly delivering that from day one of the pandemic. So we've still been able to deliver assistance to anyone that needed it throughout the entirety of the pandemic. And we still are doing. So it might look a little bit different. So, you know, staff members will be wearing face coverings. Sometimes they might be using protective sleeves, for example. But in general, the way we deliver passenger assistance, which we know is a crucial service, continues to be the same. And we've been really pleased to see that actually that our numbers of people who use our passenger assistance service have been going back up again. So for example, in the last month alone, on just my 11 stations, we've assisted about 11,000 customers. Which is a huge number and is the kind of high summer numbers that we really used to see. So it's really nice to know that customers are coming back and are traveling with confidence as well. So as well as all of the kind of keeping the railway running, which we've been working on, and we've been working in really close relationships with all of the other train companies. So I'm here as LNER today, but we've been working particularly closely with our counterparts in the north at Northern and TransPennine Express, Cross Country, Hull Trains, Grand Central, and beyond, and working as an industry to keep that consistent because we wanted you to have a seamless journey no matter where in the country you go. So we've been doing lots of work on that, but there's been, at the same time as all of that recovery piece and that keeping things going, we've been doing lots of work behind the scenes as well. It's been a great opportunity to get lots delivered. So you may remember the kind of historic line of, oh, if you need to book assistance, you need to do it 24 hours in advance before travel. And that's been around since, I think, pretty much since time began. And that's always been a requirement. But actually in April this year, which feels like forever ago now, we as an industry got together and worked with the Office of Rail and Road, and we've reduced that to 6 hours before travel. So if you can book assistance 6 hours before travel, that's a guarantee. So we still, if you can't book assistance 6 hours before, that's absolutely fine. But if you do book at 6 hours notice, that is that commitment, that guarantee that if we can't provide you with assistance, then we have failed on our commitment to you, and we will make sure that we can deliver that. And we still don't think that's enough. So by April next year, so April 2022, we'll be reducing that to 2 hours if we can't get it done sooner. But at the absolute latest, it will be April next year, 2 hours notice. For that guaranteed passenger assistance. But as I say, we know that actually a lot of customers booking in advance is not practical, it's not possible. So we've still been doing lots of work to make sure that our what's referred to as turn up and go service of just arriving at the station, preferably with about 20 minutes advance notice, we can still provide that assistance to the best of our ability where possible. So we've been doing lots of work on that, and our vision at LNER is to try and continuously reduce that number. And if you need assistance and you arrive, you just get that assistance. That's our goal. That shouldn't be a difficult thing. That's a really basic principle for us. So we're looking forward to continually improving that. We've also been doing lots of training. So we know that this is a really big area, and we know that actually I'd say a strong 90% of the problems we have can be solved by better training. So we have been spending the last 8 months and the following 4 months to come, so basically all of 2021, rolling out the biggest disability equality training package that we've ever seen on our network. So our frontline colleagues, so the people that you will come across on our trains and our stations, have been going through about 4.5 hours worth of content spread out throughout the year on a variety of subjects, from how to provide safe assistance to how to communicate confidently with customers, what kind of station and train facilities we have, understanding what we have on our network and why that's important to our customers, and equally why when it doesn't work, it's important that we get those things fixed quickly and reported. And a variety of different bits of information that can help kind of change the way, perhaps some of the stereotypes that we've had historically, and try and move to a more social approach to disability and away from this horrible blame culture that we always have, that you're disabled, so it's your fault if something goes wrong, which is absolutely not where we want to be as a business or as a society. So we are working on that, and as well as training all of our frontline colleagues, we have just completed training all of our non-frontline colleagues as well. That has been a training package we've delivered to about 3,500 people throughout the last 8 months, which has been a massive project. But it means that for the first time ever, by the end of this year, everyone in my business, whether they've been here for 20 days or 20 years, will have had the same training, which is a really great place to be. And it seems a really simple thing, but we've never had that before, because if you joined 20 years ago, you probably didn't get great training on disability equality. It really wasn't prominent back then. So we've changed our new induction training for people coming through the door today, but we're refreshing people in the business already, no matter how long they've been here, to the exact same standard. So we're really confident that's going to make a difference. And we've already seen it changing the perspective of our staff, and our staff have started challenging things that they'd have normally just kind of let slip, and giving me loads more work to do by coming up with all sorts of ideas and spotting things, which is fantastic. And it's exactly what we want. We have thousands of people out there, and we want them to help you as customers, but spot these ways we can get better as well. So training has been a huge piece of work. And the other kind of industry project that's been going on, so LNER in 2019, I think, 2019, launched sunflower lanyards. So we'd worked with the aviation industry who'd done this really successfully already, and we wanted to bring it to rail. So we launched that, and we're really pleased that since we launched that, and particularly as COVID kind of became more prominent, every train company in the UK has now joined us in recognizing sunflower lanyards. So we now have one consistent tool that every train company recognize. We all know what it means. And it's that way. If you wear one of these, you're telling us that you need a bit of extra help. We don't know what that is, but it's just a conversation starter. So you know that we will spot you and we'll come and start that conversation. So that's really made a difference. And we think we've given out roughly 20,000 of these lanyards in 2 years alone. So that's just our stations. There are plenty of other places you can get them from. So there's loads of really great work going on across the entire industry that we're really proud of, and we think is making a real difference to our customers, and that's what our customers are telling us as well. But you'll have seen as well, there's other projects such as the passenger assistance app. So we've been working with the Rail Delivery Group, who manage that project, on how we can make it easier to book assistance. So LNER already take bookings over the phone, like all train companies. We can take them over the counter in our travel centres at our stations, and we already have a web form as well online that you can fill in. But there is also now the passenger assistance app that is continuously being developed and improved by Rail Delivery Group, again, to try and make it that bit easier to book assistance. And we're working with them about how we can improve that. And later this year and the start of next year, we're looking to launch a staff version of that app, which will help us manage assistance on the ground much more reliably, better communication, and really kind of iron out of those gaps where we sometimes don't get the message across, and remove that age-old, oh, no one answered the phone when we rang ahead, that principle that we know is so frustrating for you as customers and for us as a train company as well. So that's really just some of the examples of what we've been doing throughout the last 18 months and will be continuing to do. But I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions later on. But that is it for now from me. So thank you very much.
That's brilliant. And as a voiceover user, I used the assistant app the other day and found it quite easy to use, and had a really positive experience with passenger assistance at the York station. So keep up the good work, and all the new projects that you're doing, that sounds as though you're moving in the right direction. That's great. Our next speaker is Wendy Loveday, who is the chair for the Association of Public Taxi Hire Operators. I hope I've got that right. And Wendy will tell us what the blind and partially sighted community can expect when they use taxis in or around York and the surrounding areas. So over to you, Wendy.
Hiya. Right, just to say, I'm the York Private Hire Association chair, just so as we're clear on that. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm not going to be on screen. I just want to say hi, and then I'm going to go off screen just because I'm actually using my phone, because my computer just won't work on it at the moment. Okay, so I am here, and hopefully you will hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me onto the panel. So I'm here to speak about your journeys in taxis. Please forgive me if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but I'm going to begin by explaining the major differences between hackney carriage and private hire vehicles. Then I'll go on to a little bit about your rights in a taxi, followed by what to do if you are discriminated against in a taxi. And I'll be utilising an example from the courts there. I'll explain a little about how you can make your journey in a taxi better for you, and a few facts about wheelchair accessible vehicles for those here that are partially sighted wheelchair users. I'm hoping by the end of my panel topic that your future taxi journey will be successful and more tailored towards your specific needs, giving you the confidence to travel in our taxis. So the difference is hackney carriages display the sign taxi on top of their vehicle, which will be lit up when they are free to take a fare. You can flag these down. They tend to be black, but aren't always. York Hackneys have a half moon yellow taxi plate displayed on the rear of their vehicle, generally near their registration plate. Private hire never have the word taxi on them. They have door signage which says the name of the company plus the words pre-booked only. So you cannot flag these down. You book them through their office by phone or on their app. York private hire vehicles have rectangular maroon plates on the front and the rear of their licensed vehicle. So that is a way to ensure that when you get into a taxi in York, you are getting into a York licensed vehicle. If you can see to check, then do look for, make sure they've got the right plates on. When I'm referring to taxis here, I mean the private hire and hackney carriage, but if any questions come in that are specific to either trade, then I will speak of them individually. So moving on to your rights, even though it's been illegal to discriminate against disabled people for over 20 years, the Equality Act 2010 legally protects people from discrimination at work and in everyday life. And my understanding of it is it became a single act, pulling smaller acts together with the main aim to make it easier to understand and to strengthen your protection. So when you think about how long humans have been around, this determination to stomp out discrimination is really still in its infancy. So we all need to make a concerted effort that discrimination does not happen, and we can utilise this act to prosecute if the need arises. It's there to help us all, and we should use it. As taxi drivers, the Equality Act forms the basis of the training and safeguarding course that all taxi drivers in York must study and pass before becoming taxi drivers. And we also have to attend a refresher course on it every 3 years. So to move on to your specific rights in a taxi, within the 2010 Act, Section 20 deals with service providers, ensuring that they make reasonable adjustments to enable access to their services, thereby ensuring that taxis are accessible to all disabled people. Section 165 deals with the rules governing wheelchair accessible vehicle drivers, ensuring that the customers can be carried in the wheelchair in the vehicle or in the passenger seat if they prefer, that the driver can give reasonable assistance and that they are not charged any extra for their journey. Section 168 and 170 specifically deals with visually impaired people, and that requires that non-exempt taxi drivers carry assistance dogs and do not charge extra to carry them. So what it means is it's against the law to refuse a taxi to a visually impaired person based on their disability or their need to use an assistance dog or a wheelchair. It is also illegal for a driver to charge you any extra money at all for carrying your dog, even if your dog molts hair onto the cab. They can't even charge you a soilage fine. So if you are discriminated against in a taxi, for example, if a taxi driver refuses you entry into their cab because you have a guide dog, or at the end of the journey charges you extra, they're breaking the law and you have rights, so you can take action. So unless the driver has a medical exemption certificate for a serious allergy to a dog which is dangerous to their health, in York, I would point out, by the way, only one driver holds one of these certificates. That's really important to know. So they can't refuse you access. So to challenge it in the first instance, it's recommended that you contact your local licensing authority. For us, that's York. But let's say, for example, you went to Malton, went to the beer festival, and you decided to get a cab back, a Malton cab back. Then if you get refused entry into a taxi or get charged extra for having your dog with you, then you would contact them in the first instance. But you can also seek legal advice if you intend to potentially take up legal action. But you must be sure that you do that within 6 months. And a precedent has been set in taxis now. It was set last year. Colin Pereira prosecuted Uber driver Mohammed Hafiz Raja for refusing to pick him up because of his guide dog. The guy said, "It's my car, mate." And Colin informed him that it was against the law to refuse him, saying that the law states you are not allowed to refuse a guide dog. But the Uber driver insisted he had the power to refuse and drove off. Colin filmed the incident and he won the case. So Mohammed was ordered to pay over £1,700 in costs and banned from driving for Uber. So I think that's really quite a significant precedent has been set there. So I can only encourage you to really, really know your rights. I'm sure you do, you'll know them better than me. But don't let any driver discriminate against you and get away with it. So to help you on your journey, if you require assistance with taxis, it is simply you and the driver, so it should be really easy. But if you know in advance you're going to need assistance to get into the cab, then it would be really helpful if you inform the taxi office. So when you phone to book your taxi, if you can let the operator know that you're going to need picking up from your front door, that would be really helpful. And then then she passes that information on. I say she, that was very sexist, sorry, she or he passes that information on to the driver. And then, you know, you can link their arm or whatever it is that you require. If you're at Marks and Spencer's, for example, and you need picking up from the chairs behind the tills there, just let the operator know. The driver will park the vehicle up outside Marks and Spencer's, come in, give you a shout, come and find you and bring you back to his cab. So it's no problem to us. Basically, it's important that you state what you need. It helps us to help you get the service that you require. And so I just wanted to give you some of the reality for taxi drivers, just some facts that you might find useful, especially for visually impaired wheelchair users. There are 678 licensed York vehicles. Of those, 98 are wheelchair accessible. So that's about 15% of York's whole trade are wheelchair accessible. These 98 vehicles are used for wheelchair work, but they also carry all other types of passengers too. So I'll give you an example. In the company I work for, wheelchair accessible vehicle drivers work some of the longest shifts as they're kept going from dawn till dusk. They cover specialist transport areas such as hospitals, the dialysis units, school runs, special need adults, etc. The list is endless, and no matter how long they work, they'll never cover the amount of wheelchair work that's there. And this frustrates the drivers and the wheelchair users alike. But wheelchair accessible vehicles are actually on the decline because the price of the Euro 6 vehicles that council insist on us using are pricing most wheelchair drivers out of the market when it comes to the point where their vehicle they have at the moment gives up the ghost, they can't replace it like for like. They have to replace it with a higher level vehicle. So unfortunately, a lot of the wheelchair drivers that are passionate about the work are ending up having to turn to saloons.
30 seconds left, Wendy.
Okay, yeah, that's
thank you.
perfect. Yeah, so to finish, I hope I've just helped clarify your position when it comes to traveling as a visually impaired person in a taxi. This subject is really very, very close to my heart. So I want to ensure that you know your rights and that you do not allow any taxi driver to discriminate against you and get away with it. I want you to have the confidence to get out there and use our taxis safe in the knowledge that you are protected by law. Thank you.
That's great. That's really interesting that there's only one person in your organisation that has an exemption certificate. I'm sure that pleases a lot of people that are regular taxi users. So thank you very much for that. That was very clear and concise, and I'm sure a lot of people will be happier knowing that knowledge when they use the taxis. Our next speaker is Georgia Heathman from TIA Mobility. And although TIA Mobility are an electric scooter provider, they have been working in collaboration with blind and visually impaired people to make e-scooters a lot safer. And Georgia will explain how the project is getting on and where we are in the current situation. So over to Georgia. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon, and hi everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's been really interesting to listen to the other speakers. So thank you for having me, certainly. So yeah, my name's Georgia Heathman. I'm the Public Policy Manager for TIA Mobility for UK and Ireland. So TIA Mobility, we are Europe's largest micromobility operator. We have a fleet of e-scooters, e-bikes and e-mopeds, and we're now in over 130 cities in 15 countries across Europe and in the United Arab Emirates as well. So in the UK, we have our operations in New York and operations in London. But even though we're a European organization, doesn't mean we're a remote international business. Certainly our operations are all run locally. We work with local people to help us ensure that we run a service that's reflective of local communities and provides job opportunities in the cities and towns that we serve. But as a young business, we are less than 3 years old. We were started in 2018. Wait, yes. And our mission is to change mobility for good. And that really comes from our CEO and co-founder, who in fact has dedicated his entire stake in the business to causes that will benefit fighting the climate change and the climate emergency. And that's really what our mission is, to try and reduce the reliance on private car by offering an alternative and sustainable mode to people that can access it. In fact, we were as well the first climate neutral operator, which I think is really important of how important sustainability is to TIA, and our services will only be sustainable in cities and towns if they are inclusive and they don't impact on the independence of people who aren't able to currently use the fleet that we have on offer. So I wanted to just touch on safety, and then following that, I'll touch a lot on our work that we've been doing with Ian and sight loss councils and TPT, certainly. So we take a safety first approach to all we do. So our hardware, our software, our operations and our policies. So our e-scooter design has, over the course of just 2.5 years, we've had nearly 10 different e-scooters. This is to allow for innovation, to make sure that our e-scooters are incredibly safe, they are robust, And certainly our operations and the way that we run our services means that we don't have e-scooters or e-bikes just dotted around the city. And we've been able to learn those lessons from those early micromobility operators that got it wrong and weren't operating inclusively. So we've really sort of been able to look back on what didn't work and make sure from the start that our operations are safe and run inclusively. So as part of that, we work with experts that help us scrutinize our approach, and they play a real key role in allowing us to achieve a really high safety performance. And certainly in the UK, in our first 6 months of operations in York, we had 0 accidents in the city, something we're very proud of and very happy to have experienced. So we, part of that work, we established our TIA UK Safety Board, on which sits Thomas Pockington Trust and other senior external experts who really scrutinise everything we do and make sure they're holding us to account, and that our policies are reflective of the different needs of people that we that live in the communities in which we serve. So beyond that core function we have of the board, we've also had some dedicated projects with those organisations that sit there. Partnering with Thomas Pockington Trust to be the first e-scooter operator to commit to adding an acoustic vehicle alert to our scooters, so that we can ensure that blind and partially sighted pedestrians are aware that there's a scooter in their environment. And that's something I will touch on a bit more in detail just towards the end of my little speech. And then with Transport for All, we is another organisation that sit on our safety board, which some of you might be aware of. We developed an equalities impact assessment with them, so that we can make sure that no one would be sidelined or face undue risk from e-scooters coming to the city. And certainly they are holding us to account on actions, some of which we've already delivered on in terms of training for our on-street staff who have disability equality training to understand what the barriers are that different groups can face and how we make sure that our operations don't add to those barriers. Then probably one of the most important functions of our cities team, and certainly one that I'm particularly passionate about, is engaging with those groups who cannot use our services. And we have been an example of how we've been doing that. We hosted some drop-in sessions in York with Ian's really great help, and sight loss councils in York, so we could invite local blind and partially sighted people to come to a parking bay, understand how the technology works with these e-scooters, how heavy they are, what they look and feel like in reality, and demonstrate sort of how it works for a user, so you can properly understand some of the measures that we're putting in place to protect the safety of our customers, but also the safety of pedestrians in the environment in which we operate. And that's certainly something we're always happy to do again, should that be of interest to this group here and any other community that you might be working with or be part of. And on that technology, I just want to touch on, we operate a shared rental micromobility service, so people can find an e-bike or an e-scooter in their area, pick it up and travel to another part of the city. But we work strategically with the City of York Council to restrict speeds in certain areas, and also to select no-go, what we call no-go areas, where you simply wouldn't want the e-scooters to go. And certainly that's in areas such as pedestrianised streets and sort of central areas where you would have high pedestrian population, and you just simply, but an e-scooter interacting there would not be appropriate or safe. So we work very closely with the council on those areas, and similarly with parking. So all of our scooters, all of our e-bikes have to be parked in what we call a mandatory parking bay or mandatory parking zone. And again, we work with the council to identify where these are in the city. They're marked out with a single white line. And we use what we call 3D camera positioning software to make sure that when a user of our services ends their journey, that the e-scooter that they say is in the parking bay actually is in the parking bay. There is limitations with GPS. Sometimes in a dense urban environment, GPS can be out by up to 2 meters. So the e-scooter could think it's in the a restricted bay, but it really isn't. But the camera positioning software takes a 3D image of the area surrounding the parking bay. And it means that when a user finishes their journey, the camera, they are prompted to take a photo around them, and that technology will be able to identify that they are within the bay to up to 20 centimeters. So it really decreases the chance of an e-scooter being abandoned and such. But I will say on parking, you know, we admit that we don't always get it right, which is why the e-scooter operations at the moment, they are trials. And, you know, we certainly listen to feedback from local residents should a bay have been placed in a really inappropriate spot that is affecting accessibility in that area. So, you know, and we will very happily take any feedback on that. And, you know, we can move bays such as is necessary. And that's certainly something that we take very seriously. So it's not a case of there's a parking bay and it's not working for everyone, that we just leave it. It's very much something we're keen to address and make sure that we are protecting, as I say, the independence and accessibility of everyone in the city. I will also mention registration plates. So on all of our e-scooters and our e-bikes, we have individual registration plates that help us identify that particular e-scooter. It allows us to track whether that e-scooter has been involved in an incident. It allows us to track if it's been maintained and cleaned as part of our COVID measures. And it also allows us to make sure that we know who is riding which e-scooter at which time. So the license plates are located in 6 different locations across the vehicle. We use black text on yellow background, and that followed some really critical and important engagement with Ian and with Sight Loss Councils to make sure that this is now the standard across all of our vehicles in the UK, when previously it used to be a white registration plate.
Georgie, you've got 30 seconds left, if that's okay.
Okay, well then I'm going to skip the license registration and jump to AVAS, because that's the really key topic at the moment. So just a brief update, then I'll finish, I promise. So we were the first operator to commit to adding a sound to our e-scooters. We believe this really has to be developed with expert sound engineers and academic researchers that guarantee it's the right solution before it's rolled out. And it's certainly a top priority for us to deliver this solution, but it must be done in the right way. So we've already conducted some extensive research to understand what we need the sound to be, what criteria it should have, and we worked with Thomas Parkington Trust on the involvement of blind and partially sighted people in that sort of fact-finding initial mission part of the project. But we've prioritized finding the right solution that protects all pedestrians and doesn't create a problem for another group of people. So we want to make sure that our solution is detectable. You can tell directionality, that we set the right volume in different cities, that this sound itself can be picked up amongst the other demands of city sounds. So it's a complex project, but we are at an exciting moment. We are planning further extensive research and testing that will take place in a safe, controlled environment first, to ensure that solution is appropriate before we put it out onto any city streets. And we don't want to rush a solution out before we know it's safe. So, and what that right volume level is and what that directionality is. So I'm hoping in the next few weeks that we can share a bit more of a detailed update on that with Thomas Parkington Trust, and I hope that they will pass it on to all of you as well. But it really, I just want to reassure that it is a priority for us. We're hoping to have a solution in testing in streets, in city streets in the UK by the end of the year. But as I say, we want to make sure that it's the right one, and that we don't cause any undue risk by putting something that's not appropriate out on the street. So thank you very much for listening and having me. I hope that's been helpful.
That's great. That's really encouraging that you're using technology to act as a monitoring regime for people who are using these scooters. And I'm really looking forward to listening to your audible sound once it's been put into testing and production.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. we've just finished the individual talking section, and now I'll hand over to Ian, who has the Q&A session. So thank you very much, guys. Over to Ian.
Thanks very much, Simon, and thank you to all the speakers as well. We asked people when they registered if they had any questions in advance for the speakers to answer. Some of them have already been answered, but I think we'll go through those that we know that haven't. So Andy, you've been sat there patiently since it was your time to speak. So I'm going to go straight for the throat here, Andy. Right?
Okay.
Can you set up a drivable route through the foot streets so that taxis and private cars can drop blue badge holders near where they need to go?
Well, as you'll have gathered, this is a very much a hot topic in terms of the arrangements with the foot streets. The challenge that we have in York is that historically we've had a number of streets where around the edge people have been able to drive through and park on. But I mean, I'm aware of the geography of this because we've been having quite a lot of discussion about this quite recently. And the stage that we're at with decisions is that last night at the executive, there was an agreement to continue with the temporary arrangement, which is currently in place up until November. And at the November executive, I mean, obviously during that period, some of the responses that have come in during the consultations that have already taken place will be analysed and put into a report. But also, I think going forward in the next month or two, there will be increasingly some of the possible solutions put forward to test public reaction to whether or not those would be the right ones for us to choose. So it's quite a complex thing in terms of legal processes, as we've got the sort of the legal situation, we've got the foot streets arrangements that were put in place very quickly to allow for pavement cafes, which I'm sure those who are listening will have varying views on the relative merits of those pavement cafes. But that was, as I think I mentioned in my introduction, was one of the measures that the government instructed us and actually made the restrictions much more outside the control of the council. So I believe this last discussion about this, we were told that prior to COVID, to have a pavement cafe, you had to get planning consents, you had to go through a whole lengthy process, you had to get a license for that. Since COVID started, or since the end of the first lockdown, in fact, the councils had a week to respond, and it was basically they were expected to grant a license unless there was significant reasons why they couldn't do so. So the sort of presumption was completely switched around that pavement cafes were something that the councils were expected to facilitate. And within York, we've got over 100 such arrangements in place at the moment. So that sort of context, that is the background against which the decision was taken to extend the geographical area of the restrictions, so that they now start just at the top end of Goodrum Gate. There's basically two loops which were previously open to traffic, and including blue badges, which are now part within the cordon, as it were. So there's a Goodrum Gate through King Square to Collier Gate, and the Blake Street through St Helens Square back to Lendal. And those were the two, I'm sure that is the sort of location that the questioner might have had in mind. Now, prior to the pandemic, where blue badge holders were allowed to drive in and park on those during the Foot Street hours, there was also a significant amount of abuse by people who didn't have that concession. But the only way that that could be enforced was because of a moving traffic offence. It was down to the police to enforce that. And as we know, police are very busy with lots of different priorities. So that presented a challenge for us as a council to create a safe environment, and particularly now with those pavement cafes. I'm sure that the people who are listening to this call would have concerns about significant numbers of vehicles, whether it's a taxi or any sort of vehicle, driving through a street where it's expected that you have to walk in the road because of the pavement cafes. So that's sort of just to give you a flavour of the challenge that we're facing in terms of trying to find a safe and considerate and one which respects people's rights to access to get that balance right. On top of that, we do also have, and obviously the recent events in Afghanistan do really highlight, I certainly hope that that there isn't a sort of resurgence of terrorist attacks, but we do have a programme which we have discussed over the last, we were almost on the point of installing some of these measures. In fact, some of the measures have already gone in to protect the busiest streets in the city centre from any sort of attacks like we've seen in Nice and one or two others, Christmas markets, other places in previous years. Obviously we hope that York wouldn't see something like that, but we are advised by the anti-terrorism unit as to the need for us to implement those types of measures around the busiest streets. So
Andy, if I can cut you off so we can.
So I'm sorry. So
Yeah.
Those are all the factors that we have to take into account before saying yes. Of course, we want to see the facility for you to be dropped off outside whichever store or cafe that it is that you want to reach.
I know you've engaged
I
in.
appreciate that's not the answer. I appreciate that's not the answer that people want to hear, but that is what we're sort of trying to understand and find a solution which will be the best, the safest, but also the best solution to meet everyone's needs.
It's a conversation that I think we all know is only just starting. So I look forward to further engagement with you, Andy.
Thank you.
And the council.
So I apologise for going on, but I think it helps you to understand some of the complexities what we're dealing with.
That's okay. We'll probably come back to you with another question later if we may. But Brandon, coming on to you. Sure. Who is responsible for making it possible for visually impaired people to use bus stops? And I think when we talk about using bus stops, there's a number of measures that I think blind and partially sighted people would find useful. Things like display boards being at eye level, bus timetables being enlarged so people can actually read them. I'm not even sure that sighted people can read bus timetables, if I'm honest. But just who would be responsible for that? And if we ever did introduce talking bus stops, who would be responsible for all of that? I think you're the right person to ask, but if not, I'm sure you'll tell me that as well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting debate because lots of people use different ways to get their information. And I think as providers, and also obviously in partnership with the council, because we don't own any of that infrastructure. The bus stop is very much council infrastructure, but it's very much a partnership that helps deliver that information to the bus shelter. So it's on us as operators and City of York Council to gather, I guess, feedback from users to improve that whole experience. And the experience doesn't just start at the bus stop, actually. It starts for lots of people at home. So when they're planning their journeys, whatever that journey will be, they will look at different options. Now, we've vastly improved the digital offer that's available, as I'm sure other public transport operators have as well, and we are encouraging people to use those facilities, whether it be on the app or information via the web, or even speaking to our customer service teams. And of course, I Travel York has a lot of really good information on there to help people plan journeys. So once people go through that process of planning their journey, then obviously the experience at the bus stop is similarly important. So customers are particularly keen to understand, is the bus on time? Is the bus going to get me to where I want to be on time? So all those kind of questions are, you know, quite normal for anyone to experience when they're getting to the bus stop. So I would say, in terms of the bus stop itself, and I know that some of you may know colleagues in the York Bus Forum, that they are actively collecting information around bus stops and what makes a good bus stop. So, for example, does it have a shelter? Is there seating? Is there real-time information at the bus stop? Is there an audio option, or which bus stops would be useful to have an audio option? So, for example, there will be a lot of work going on around the station as that redevelopment goes forward, to look at the options for things like audio, things like that at bus stops. So yeah, I think the best way to position this at the moment, because I'm assuming, Ian, this won't be a one-off, and there'll be other opportunities for us to engage, for people to share their own views on the bus stop experience, and what they like, what they don't like, what they'd like to see more or less of. And then we as operators, together with the council, can, you know, use that feedback to help improve the bus stop facility as we move forward. I mean, even at the bus stop, of course, the question that a lot of users have is around how do they know which bus to get on, you know, particularly where there might be multiple buses stopping at the same stop. So that feedback similarly is really helpful, and I can assure people on this meeting that we do stress that very much with our drivers around looking out for intending passengers. We don't always get it right, because we see services, but those experiences are really important for us, because we can then go to speak to drivers to say, actually, we didn't get that right. We need to look at different ways of assisting people who clearly, you know, aren't always carrying, for example, the white cane, or they don't always have a guide dog, for example. So our drivers need to, you know, and most of them do, you know, we've got a really set of really great drivers, but where we don't get it right, if we get that feedback, we can then feedback that to the staff concerned. So I hope that kind of roundly answers the question here, and I suppose I'm throwing it back a little bit to users, but the more feedback we get, the better we can redesign things like bus stop and information.
No, that's really useful, and I can tell you for a fact that we'll definitely keep that dialogue going. Can I ask a follow-up question though, Brandon? Because it was another question that came in when people were registering, and I think, you know, you've got a really good app at the moment, First Bus. Now, I've got some sites, so I can actually use it, but is that app, is there a plan to have voiceover on it? Because it does sort of exclude a lot of people if you've got an app, and it'll tell you if the bus is approaching, it'll tell you the number of the bus, and it'll tell you how many seats. But unless there's voiceover, that information is just lost. So yeah, would you develop that, do you think?
I believe, and I'm sure other people on the meeting will correct me, but I believe elements are adapted to provide voiceover, but I may be wrong there. But last time I looked at this with a user, they did use the voiceover elements of it for the real-time information. But there are, I think again, it's user experience and where we need to improve things. I know, for example, that some of the Twitter posts that we have put on in the past have been copied and pasted from other elements, and I know that the technology can't read that. It can't repeat it in audio format. So I know our Twitter team, for example, have adapted to make sure that they don't do that. But yes, users I've spoken to, for example, through whether it be Twitter, obviously, which they're accessing via the phone, any service like that where we don't get it right, or there's something we need to do to be able to provide that voiceover facility, then let us know. I'm not an expert at all in that field, so I'd be keen to learn myself on it. If there's something that we're not doing at our side to make it easier and more accessible for people, then let's look to change it.
That's great. Thanks for your answers there, Brandon. And yeah, we will keep that dialogue going, I'm sure. Charlie, if I could come on to you now, please. So LNER operate York Station. And one of the questions that's come in is, will York Station have all platforms fitted with tactile edging anytime soon?
It's a very good question, and we're working with Network Rail. So just for, I won't go into any detail because I don't want to bore anyone, but the kind of, as much as LNER manage the train station, York Station, Network Rail manage the kind of more physical part of that station. So we are not able to ourselves go in and put tactile paving in. We are reliant on Network Rail. And as you know, there are, unfortunately, and it's frustrating to us as well, quite a lot of stations in the UK that do not have tactile paving at the moment. And Network Rail have been challenged through channels that are all very public, but equally behind the scenes, we are very much challenging Network Rail and working with them to understand the priorities for those. So we're working with them on how we can get the most important stations where this is a concern to the top of the list for priorities. Now, obviously, I'm a bit biased, so I'd like my stations at the top of the list. But there are 2,500 stations in the UK, so there is a big argument of where we need to put the investment first, because the reality is it will take time. So we don't yet have that plan from Network Rail. We are hoping to have it soon so we can understand when our stations fit in there. But for example, York will be one of our priority stations because it is a major interchange station. It's got a high footfall, and also it's got some platforms that do have tactile and some that don't, which to me is worse than having none. So we are working on what we can do, temporary solutions, which are a start with things like announcements and information, so you at least know what to expect. But we are challenging them on how we can get that solved. But for example, there are other stations that are significant priorities for us. So Grantham, for example, might not feel like a priority station, but Grantham is a station that has an 125-mile-an-hour line speed, which means in layman's terms, trains go through there fast, very fast. Whereas York, all trains stop. Doesn't make it much better. The trains still come in at some speed, but for us, Grantham is a significant safety concern over York because of the speed that trains go through. So for us, it's a priority for getting that fitted there. But York is another one because the trains come in at speed. It's a complicated station, and we know that it actually has more customers than most of our other stations. So that's probably a bit of a rubbish answer in the long term in terms of I haven't actually given you a timeline, but I would like that answer as much as yourselves. But we have a very good relationship with Network Rail, and we are challenging them that as soon as they can get that roadmap of when are these hundreds of stations going to have this work done, that we can see where our stations fit in that. But in the meantime, we are working on getting that information on our website, so you at least know which stations do and don't, because we know it's not consistent, and also announcements on the trains and the stations as soon as we can that warn you if you're at a station or coming to a station that doesn't have them. So it's very much something that's really high on our agenda. So I'm sorry that's not a very specific answer, but hopefully it reassures you that this is a real priority for us, and I want to get you an answer as much as you want an answer from me. So we are working on it.
Okay, can I make an offer then to you, Charlie?
Okay.
Would you like to work with a user group that could actually sort of give you the passenger experience and hopefully add some weight to your argument with Network Rail? Because I think the York Sight Loss Council, and I'm sure other sight loss councils that operate along your route would willingly offer their services to do that.
Absolutely, always open to having those conversations. We do as well have, I didn't mention it earlier, but we do have a customer panel that we've created specifically made up of disabled people who are frequent customers. It's still small, still quite fresh, it's quite new, but that's one example of engagement we've done. But that does not mean at all that I would not be open to as much engagement as we can get to help push that pressure and to know where we need to focus. So yeah, always open to those opportunities. Absolutely,
Lovely.
yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for your answer there, Charlie. Coming on to you next, Wendy, if we can. It said, if taxi drivers need a license to work in York, why are Uber allowed to operate in the city without the same level of scrutiny?
Oh my Lord. Right.
And can I just say we've got 10 minutes until we finish this.
Yeah.
So if you could keep it as short as
I'll
possible.
You thought I had a difficult question.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that, Andy. So why? Right. York councillors did the right thing. They found Uber to be not fit or proper to hold a license in York through safety concerns. Plus lots of things that they've done where data was concerned too. So they did the right thing. They basically banned them from York. But because the council officers were taken in by Uber and believed Uber when Uber said they will still continue coming to work in York and they are legal, and they believed it, then the council officers won't challenge them. So even though the councillors did the right thing, the council officers just sit back and let Uber do whatever they want, because it will cost too much money to challenge them, because Uber will just keep taking it. The thing is, they are actually breaking section 46 1D of the 1976 Act. But nobody out there will dare to challenge Uber, which is clearly what they're banking on. Yeah, that's the short answer.
Okay. Well, no, thank you for that, and hopefully it does answer the questioner's point.
Just
there.
as you might expect, I would have a slightly different slant on that, but I mean, the difficulty is that you can always I know it wasn't, but I think it is exactly my responsibility. Well, the licensing committee's responsibility rather than Wendy Loveday's responsibility.
Okay. Before we break out
legal advice, it's legal advice. That's basically what we and everyone can get legal advice and get slightly different answers. But
so before we break out into civil war, if I can move on to Georgia's question to make it fair to everybody, so they all have a say. Georgia, I think you answered about the AVAs and you know, the rollout of that, and hopefully that will come into operation. But here's one that a couple of people have sort of asked is, how do I report an incident to TIA, as the registration numbers on the scooters are too small for me to see? And I guess what somebody is saying is, why would they report it to TIA? Because isn't that you looking after yourselves rather than looking after the person who's had the run-in with the scooter? Sorry.
Well, yes and no. Well, no, I don't agree. No, I don't think so. I think it's important that we are notified when an incident takes place so that we can support a user and respond appropriately, whether that's a incident that takes place because of poor behavior by one of our customers, or if it's an incident that takes place due to an external factor. So I think reporting problems with e-scooters to us is very important and something we want to know about. When
I think the question is, so Georgia, is the registration,
how do they do it without
small?
using the so yes, totally, they're not accessible to license plates aren't accessible for everyone. So really all we need is a roundabout time, if possible, location of where you are, and date for when maybe you experience or witness something, and we, using technology, are able to identify which e-scooter that was in that particular moment, and so we can deal with it accordingly, whether that's appropriate, inappropriate riding, such as riding on pavements, an abandoned e-scooter, and we can link that back to the respective account of the user, and we will issue them a warning. If we're told of any poor behavior, our users will get a warning, depending on how serious the behavior is. If it's something such as tandem riding, which is 2 people riding on a scooter together, that would be an immediate ban, as well as if we find out if somebody has given their account to a person under the age of 18 to take a ride, that would be an immediate ban as well. So yes, and we have 1 number and 1 email address, which I think, Ian, you probably have, but I can share it with you again, and you can share it with this group.
Yeah,
so.
We have it, just so people know. Don't be sort of thrown by this, but it's a Liverpool number that will then transfer you to Berlin.
No, we've got a new one now. We've got a new one now. So I will send it. I'll send it through to you right now. But yes, so no, you're right. We recognise that the license plate isn't accessible for everyone right now. So at the moment, yeah, we just a date and time and location would be helpful, and we are looking at other solutions, clever QR codes and such that potentially could improve reporting and make it more accessible. But yeah, we don't need the license plate number.
Thank you everyone. There are more questions and we're not going to get through them all, so if I can send them on to you and maybe you can respond individually to them and we can circulate them to people who have been on the call tonight. But I just want to go over to Rachel and ask if any questions have come in whilst we've been talking.
So yes, there is one. Okay. No, it's a comment. So we have 2 comments and a question that was answered online. So what do you want to do? Yeah.
Well, if they're comments, let's see what the comments are, Rachel.
Okay, so Caroline says, going back to York train station, the subway is too dark and other cities have lighter ones to walk through. So why is York not that light? I'm always hear problems walking in York. Only. Okay, so how come others are better?
Yeah, I think that was one of the questions that actually had come in previously. Charlie, would you be able to sort of answer that one? So the subway, anyone going down in the lift that's maybe a visually impaired wheelchair user, it's the only option they have of getting to different platforms. It is quite dark down there. It can be quite intimidating depending on the time of day. Is anything being done to look into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a huge piece of improvement work going on across York. So you'll obviously know about the bigger piece of what's coming in the future that's been mentioned about the York, the plan for the front. But actually, internally, what we've been doing with the station, you'll hopefully know that we've now got a new travel centre. We've now got a nice new first class lounge and all that kind of stuff. And that's just the kind of part of the York transformation programme. We've been looking at what we can do with the subways as well to make them, I mean, as much as they're just not very appealing, if nothing else. If we ignore the obvious problems that you've mentioned about the lighting of actually the accessibility, they're also just not very appealing. Like you say, they're quite old. I mean, it doesn't really fit with the nice vibe that York Station has. So I'm not exactly clear on what we're doing and when yet, but it does form part of the York kind of station works. So I'll take that one away and ask the question of if there's any kind of shorter term answers, but yes, we are very keen to do something with those subways to make them more kind of convenient, friendly routes to take. As you say, they're not particularly nice during the day, let alone when it's kind of dark. So absolutely, we want to bring those up to standard with the rest of the station. So it is very much on our radar, but I will try and get a more kind of succinct answer as to if there's a short-term plan and share with you if I can.
Okay. So Diane, so you had a good question around whether Councillor Andy and Brendan could work together to make bus stops accessible to blind and partially sighted people. I don't know if Andy, you want to come on and talk about your reply?
Well, yes, it was, well, the reply I said was that imagine that the issue is mostly where there's, as has been described, several bus stops together, such as at the station or Judge Hudson Street, places like that. And I would assume that what would potentially help is a facility whereby there was either some sort of braille or some indication from geolocation, if that was a technical solution, to be able to say what buses call at that stop. I don't know whether that's done elsewhere in the country, but it would seem to me that that's the sort of thing you might be looking for, so that you get some reassurance that you're at the right stop for the bus service that you want to catch.
Okay,
I don't know
then.
if that helps, but obviously it's something I'd be happy to look at. You know, we'd need to, I would think that we want to try and have a solution that would apply to all city centre bus stops rather than just sort of picking one at random and trying to put that provision there. But certainly it's something, as has been suggested, like if we're going to have all new stops outside the station in the next couple of years, that could be something we could incorporate from the outset in the design of the shelters.
Any comments, Ian?
Yeah, no, I think that'd be really useful, Andy. Is that all the Q&As we've got so far, Rach? Because I've got a couple more here.
Yeah, go for it. There's a comment which is praising Charlie Woods and LNER about their proactive approach to meeting the needs of blind and partially sighted people. So there you go.
There you go, Charlie. And I'm going to sort of push Brandon on this one a little bit. Will there be any audio description on the #1 service, Brandon, to be specific? And I've got a follow-up question to that, if you could keep that one short.
Yeah, so yes, there will be. In terms of timescales, I referred to a couple of things in the introduction. One of them is around the recent government announcement, which we're still waiting for details on. So in other words, First Bus and other operators have already committed to investing in audiovisual next stop equipment on buses that are delivered new. So as happened in York and Leeds in very recent months. In terms of the commercial networks, that particularly relates to the park and ride network. There are a couple of things there. As I say, one of them is the government announcement of what may be required, which of course potentially may release some funding as well to assist in being able to extend that, because that's a UK issue, obviously not just for our part of the world. The other is what I referred to, the national bus strategy. So there's a pot of money that the government have available for investment, and it's through the national bus strategy, but there's also something called zebra funding as well, which I think there's been some reports of actually in the local media. New bus investment, basically, new bus zero emission investment, and with that comes the opportunity for audiovisual next stop announcement as well. So there's funding pots available, and there's also government policy, and the three of them are coming together, hopefully, to be able to accelerate audiovisual investment onto bus services. So yes, it's coming. We just can't give a timescale as yet.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick follow-up question? Because this is I don't know if this is a rumor or if it's fact, but I know you're the man that can dispel it one way or the other. Does the driver have a switch in the cab that he can turn, or she, that they can turn audio description on and off?
No. We have had this asked before, because there are occasions when the unit or the facility isn't working exactly as it should be. And there's been a view that the drivers can either turn the volume up or down, or they can actually switch the facility on and off. What the unit is actually based on the service information that the driver puts into. So there's a small unit above the driver's head, which is effectively the technology or the ticket machine, depending upon the bus, that actually dictates what the service number is. And then once you put that information into that system, that then talks to the audiovisual next stop kit that's on the bus, so it knows what routes it's on. Because obviously, for the audiovisual kit to work, it's got to know which route it's on and whereabouts it is geographically, so it announces the stop in advance of the bus getting to the stop, for example. So the satellite, the information on the bus, the kit that controls the route, all of that has to work together. But that is not dictated by the bus driver, excepting the bus driver putting in the bus route that the bus is on.
Right. Okay.
So, but we are very. When we were putting this work together, I mentioned about some of the research that we did when we first introduced audio-visual next stop announcements, and actually we got lots of feedback, including we had too much repetition about the stop that was coming up, for example, that neither the customer liked nor the driver liked, because it was unnecessary noise effectively, and it was not clear enough when you're repeating messages sometimes too often. So things like that, the tone of the voice, the speed of the voice, all of those factors actually go into the design and making it fit for purpose. So through the user groups and the contacts and the partnerships we have, we always look to continue to work together to deliver the best product we can, and we'll continue to do that as the rollout happens.
Right. Brandon, thank you very much. That was a very thorough answer. I'd like to thank all our speakers this evening for giving up their time. It is a bank holiday Friday. Brandon has actually sort of come off holiday to actually do this evening, so special thanks to him, but thanks to everyone. I will send you out the questions that we haven't been able to ask tonight. Hopefully you can respond to those, and we will send those out to all the people who have signed up for tonight. But thank you all very, very much for joining, and I hope those people that tuned in found some of the comments and some of the discussions very useful. Thank you, everyone. Have a great bank holiday weekend.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. Brilliant. Very good.
Are you there, Rachel?